Yes, the last time we spoke was as a result of the early day motion commemoration. We filed legal action at the Attorney General's office on the 6th of May 2003. And so basically we now have a response from the Attorney General's Department, and really I just want to feed back what that response has been. And it really fits very much within our legal strategy that we adopted, the Black Quest for Justice campaign, which is a fully integral part of the Black United Front. And basically the response said that the Attorney General's office was unable to assist. And the reason why is because first of all, we were asking for the Attorney General to institute their powers of investigation under the International Criminal Courts Act of 2001. So it was really part of the whole legal quagmire of how you even begin legal action in this country when you file charges of crimes against humanity. So we had to use the existing legal system, and our approach has always been legal and extra-legal. And what that means is that we use the existing system with a view to stretching the boundaries of existing law so that it can meet the ends of justice. And basically we were referred to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office because the Attorney General said that he didn't have powers to launch a public inquiry, which is what we were also asking for. We wanted a public inquiry because we were saying that we don't want this to be decided behind closed doors. This is a public interest issue. Reparations is an issue that affects all of us as Black people. It's also a human rights interest. It's a human rights issue for all of humanity. And so we really wanted to bring the domain of reparations from our communities, grassroots communities, into the mainstream. Now, the response we got regarding the powers to investigate was quite interesting, because basically what the response is saying, that as a result of the law, as the legislation is framed, slavery was not a crime at the time, and that the International Criminal Courts Act can only apply to crimes that have been committed after the implementation of the International Criminal Courts Act, which is 2001. So basically, if we're talking about crimes against humanity that have been committed against our African ancestors and the legacies of that thereof, the starting point cannot be from the past, because the law does not allow you to bring a cause of action for crimes committed in the past. So basically it was suggesting that if we want to consider another claim, that it would be best to look at whether there were acts that were being perpetrated today that were criminal, that we could also trace back historically. And so really this is what we were seeking to show in the beginning. And part of the difficulty is that when we talk about legal claims or writs or filing a legal course of action, members of the public feel it's a simple matter of you just draft a wonderful case, you put it before the courts and you will get justice. We were never under this illusion. But part of the difficulty for our communities and most non-lawyers, and in fact many conventional lawyers are not honest enough to admit it, is that there's only so far that you can go within conventional legal practice. Hence today why we're having an inquest into the death of Roger Sylvester, why we haven't as yet had any criminal prosecution for any police officers responsible for the deaths of Black people. You know, I think it's important that we just wake up to the reality of the situation that we're living in and recognise how the law is also the law of the former slave masters. And so we were very clear about this from the beginning, and we formulated a legal strategy which would actually expose the legal system, because that was our role as legal practitioners, legal activists and community activists, that we said we will utilise the existing law really to expose it, and we will take the existing law as far as it can go. And so part of that as well is to show members of the public, even people in the reparations movement who may have had a misguided understanding as to the purpose of lawsuits, which are really about education and mobilisation. Because if most of us, and most of us are law-abiding citizens, however we define the law, and yet if we're saying that we're putting our case before the powers that be in the legal system, and the legal system does not deem our case worthy does not afford us even a hearing, then that really tells us something. And it's part of the public education strategy that we can only, it's fine to talk about something in an abstract way or to tell people, well, this is how it works in practice, but because of our own, I think, misguided illusions sometimes, and that's not really our fault, it's because of the education that we receive, even in law school, that it's important to go through those steps so that we can show people at every stage why the law fails us, how it fails us, and what we need to do in order to achieve justice. And so basically that's what we did. And so for us, it was a victory because we formulated a strategy that we knew would work. But it's about how do we translate that and how do we also get other people to understand the strategy that we're adopting. Because as lawyers, many of us, having trained as conventional lawyers within the conventional legal system, have found it difficult to integrate our critical understanding of law and even looking at law in its socio-economic and political context, and how do we integrate that theoretical knowledge, our knowledge of our black history and the role that we've contributed to society, how do we integrate that into our professional practice as lawyers? And that's always been the challenge. And so really with this legal action, that's what we sought to do. The Black Quest for Justice campaign, under the auspices of the Black United Front, adopted a global strategy. In the same way, because what we're saying is that as African people, part of the deception has been to define us as different peoples, but really we are one people. In the same way that the Jewish people issued their claims on the basis of their Jewish nationhood and identity, the same way that other groups who've received reparations for historical injustices has also done. But we had in the reparations movement Africans in America filing their own legal actions and other political actions, Africans on the continent, even within Europe, Africans from all different countries. But what we didn't have was this holistic understanding of how we all fit together. And that's always problematic, even within conventional law, because the first thing that will go against us is, well, what is your identity? What is your international legal personality? And so now this strategy we were able to adopt without actually having to pay any costs, because that's also part of the dilemma that we have as lawyers. When you bring a legal action, if let's just say we were suing corporations, one of the issues that we came up against, one of the hurdles very early, was the matter of costs. And then we figured, why should we pay all this money in costs when the very people who we're seeking to get justice from are also upholding the system of legalized injustice? And as a matter of principle, we said no. And it is really about thinking outside of the box. And I think that's very difficult for some of us to do because of the miseducation that we receive, not only in the schools, but in other aspects of our lives. So as professionals, and whether we're professionals or not, we're always taught that there's a particular way that you do things, and it's how the Europeans do it. And so we were adopting a strategy that was really about law as liberation, and from an African-centered global justice perspective. And so we felt that we needed to delegitimize the existing legal system of disorder, and really expose it for its weaknesses and its institutionalized prejudice and discrimination, which it metes out to peoples of African descent and other peoples of color around the world. Now, interestingly enough, I have here in my hands the response from the Attorney Generals, and it says that the British Crown has no legal personality and is not an entity that can be prosecuted as such. Now, for us, we were very clear. We didn't want to prosecute individuals. We were looking at the state in terms of being the perpetrator of these crimes, not only historically, but in contemporary times as well. And so we kind of going against this thing about, okay, you just bring individuals before courts in terms of even human rights cases, Rwanda and so forth, other cases, because it's not individuals that commit these acts. They act with a state machinery behind them. And for us, that's the British government, who are still perpetrating crimes against humanity, against black people abroad, but also here in Britain. And so we got the very answer. Why is it then that the Crown as such has no legal personality? So the very institution, and it's not against the Queen personally, it's about the office of the Queen. So whether it was Queen Elizabeth II or not, it would whoever is holding that office. And we link it to contemporary injustice. So for instance, in the prisons today, people when they are detained, imprisoned, are detained at Her Majesty's pleasure. And so really that's what we were seeking to expose. So why is it the very people who are responsible in terms of our leaders, well, maybe not our leaders, the leaders of the British government and their various institutions and state machineries of the police and the courts, the judiciary, the educational system, the health system, they're all connected, but yet we cannot bring people to account. And really this is a victory for us in the Black Quest for Justice campaign under the auspices of the Black United Front, because now we are seeking to embark upon a wide-scale legal literacy campaign. And really legal literacy is about taking law to the people. It's about demystifying the law, because a lot of the approach was coming to us as lawyers and saying, well, you know, what's happening on the legal front? Surely if we just put down the case on paper, we will win in court. And so what you find in conventional law is that the reason why it's taken so long, even for some lawsuits, let's just take America for example, to come into being, is because of the way in which lawyers have to draft justice claims to fit into the existing frameworks of law. So really we're looking about what can we put down on paper that's going to make us win a court case, as opposed to is this court case and its formulation of it thereof meeting our needs and our interests in terms of justice. And what we must remember is that at the moment a lot of what is practiced, what is termed to be law, is not really about justice. And so that's why after 10 years on, after the death of Stephen Lawrence, say for instance, the killers are still at large, despite all the public inquiry, the Lawrence report, you know, the Macpherson report, despite the Race Relations Amendment Act, black people are still facing racism. So it's really not just about legal action, and really it's looking at what is the purpose of legal action, what educational, mass mobilizational purpose does it serve, and it's really seeking to get other people on board, because it's not about bringing a case before lawyers and we go and articulate or advocate on behalf of the whole community. It has to be a battle that all of us, you know, play our part, whether we're educators, whether we're researchers, whether we're medical practitioners, whether we're community activists and organizers, whatever we are, whoever we are. The reparations movement is not going to be successful unless we all get on board. And it's really a people's issue. The issue of reparations for African people, Pan-African reparations, is a human rights concern. It's about our humanity. It's about the kind of world that we live in. It's about the kind of values that we have. It's about our beliefs, and it's about what we're saying about not only who we were, but who we are today and who we're going to be tomorrow. And so our approach, therefore, as I said, is to really engage in mass community education, because many people who do not support reparations, and I'm talking about primarily, say, even our own communities, reparations at present is still a fringe issue, and it really needs to become an issue for the mainstream, and not just for black society, it's also an issue for white society. And we take our standpoint from Malcolm X, you know, when he argued that this is not, he said at the time, a Negro problem or an American problem, it's a world problem for humanity. It's not a question of civil rights, but it's a question of human rights. And our reparations claim is as old as justice, it is as old as humanity itself. the reparations movement really needs to also embrace the wider society, because we have to begin to look at what is our vision of a post-reparations global order. What is the type of society that we want to bring into being? And in order to do that, we first have to understand the society that has been created as a result of the historical injustices of enslavement. And I think it's really too nice a term even to talk about slavery or enslavement, because that kind of is a very sterile word to use to describe the horrors that have been committed against black peoples of African descent. Let's look at, for instance, the prisons full up of black people. Let's look at the psychiatric institutions full up of black people. Let's look at the local authorities, children supposedly looked after in local authority care, full up of black children and children of dual heritage. Let's look at the health system. We're, getting all these kinds of illnesses and ailments disproportionate to our population here in the United Kingdom. Every aspect of our lives, from the womb to the tomb, we are discriminated against and we are impoverished and disadvantaged. Now, unless we are saying that there is something genetically wrong or inferior about us, or that we are genetically weak, then it cannot be normal to see the high levels of black people overrepresented in all these systems that we see. And in fact, if this were happening in white society would be declaring a state of emergency. But it seems as though we have become so used to being down, we have become so used to being downtrodden, that we no longer feel the need to challenge these injustices. And for us, our reparations demand, claim, movement in the Black United Front, that is, really starts on the premise of the injustices which are happening today. And then we trace it right back to the historical. So what we're saying is, unless we can actually stop the harm being done to our people today, it really makes no sense to talk about what happened to our ancestors. And we need to look at what happened in enslavement, the Holocaust of enslavement, the Maangamizi as we call it. That was about dislocating us, that was about dispossessing us, not only from our homelands, from our culture, but dispossessing us of our wealth, our identity, our languages, our names, our religions, our birthright. That is just phenomenal in terms of the damage that has been done. So in effect, as black people of African descent living here in the United Kingdom, how many of us really know who our ancestors were? Even going back 3, 4, 5 generations, how many of us can trace our family trees? And we need to look at our current situation in British society, despite the fact that we keep hearing about black advancement with the rising black middle class, who are also, a lot of them, forgetting their roots and losing touch with the community, and really are becoming successful in the global system of white supremacy. And so we really need to look at what is success in this society. And so we see constantly that we are at the bottom of society in whatever aspects. Just look at our own economic situations, the injustices that we face in all aspects of our life. And this is not just in Britain. This happens throughout the world, wherever you find black people. And the significance of this is that unless we begin to articulate our issues, our problems as group issues, then we're not going to go very far. And I think there's been a general lack of foresight on the part of, for instance, many of our civil rights campaigns, I would even say, in this country, where we don't argue as a group. We don't argue that the injustices, whether it's deaths on the street, whether it's deaths by the police, whether it's deaths in the psychiatric institutions, are happening to us not as black people as individuals, but they are happening to us as black people, as a group of people. Yeah, so this is a racial oppression, racialized oppression. And the significance of this understanding was actually advanced and was accepted by consensus in Durban at the 2001 World Conference Against Racism, which took place in South Africa, where it was acknowledged that people of African descent suffer a particular type of racism. It was called Anti-Black Racism at that conference. At the follow-up conference to the Durban conference in Barbados, which took place in October 2002, we further articulated anti-black racism we termed it Afrophobia. And basically, it's speaking to the racism that we face is as a result of our history of enslavement, slavery, colonialism, and neocolonialism, and that the legacies of these acts are still with us today, and that we cannot really move forward as a people until we have had recognition that the legacies are what we see in terms of the overrepresentation on all social institutions in this country. And so until we have recognition of that you cannot understand even black on black violence, the gun violence that we're seeing in our communities. You cannot understand the black children, being dispossessed on the streets, being locked up, banged up, really being put into a psychiatric and prison or industrial complex unless you understand our history. And therefore, when we're looking at ways forward, whether it's anti-racism policies or legislation, we need to also look at for us, we would argue in the Black United Front that we cannot even understand contemporary policies to bring about so-called social equity, such as the government policies on community regeneration and neighbourhood renewal, unless we take into account the historical experience of black peoples of African descent in particular. And that's because what does community empowerment mean for us? What does neighbourhood renewal mean for us? What does community regeneration mean for us? It means that as black peoples living here in Britain, our communities, our base, our strength, our families extend outside of the United Kingdom. Whether it's Africa, whether it's Caribbean, whether it's other parts of the black world, Oceania, Asia and the Pacific and so forth. So we are a global people. But what the legislation does in this country, which many of us black people actually collude with, is it seeks to define us. So I was very amazed to look at some of the boxes they have on these ethnic monitoring forms, and so many different categories for black. It just reminds me of apartheid South Africa. And in fact, this seeking to just define us away out of our own blackness. And really we must fight against this. I object to the term ethnic minorities or minority ethnic, and so many of our black organisations are also using this terminology and accepting that this minoritized status. We are not an ethnic minority or minority ethnic community. No way are we that, because our peoples, in fact the very people who are seeking to define us, are the ethnic minority, the Caucasians, the Europeans. And we really have to look at the power of language and the concepts that these have in terms of our own psyche, and how it encourages us to feel inferior, it encourages us to see ourselves as being less powerful than what we are. And when we really recognize that our power base is in our people, it's in our lands that are outside of the United Kingdom, no more then should we accept this minoritized status. And we should actually fight to be defined as who we are, as African peoples, as peoples of African descent. And this was what was fantastic about Durban, because the Durban Programme of Action, the Intergovernmental Programme of Action, uses the terminology of Africans and peoples of African descent. That's specifically there. So no longer do we have to go on to these, amorphous studies of BME communities where we really don't know and we can't see who is being disaffected and to what proportions. Black means all things, it can include peoples of Asian descent and so forth. Irish people as well are defined as being black within social systems and so forth. We really need to have clarity, because unless we have clarity, we will not really begin to understand the dire, dire situation that we are in as African people. in light of the response that we got from the Attorney General's office and in light of our strategy which preceded that, we have now formulated a campaign called We Charge Genocide. And really what we are doing, that's the Black United Front, is charging the United Kingdom government, the state and its agencies with genocide against black peoples, not only here in Britain, but worldwide. So we're talking about black peoples all over the globe. We're talking about in Australia. We're talking about the native peoples of the indigenous peoples, of the Americas. We're talking about in Asia as well, the indigenous black peoples of Asia, because we must not forget that in terms of, these days, the Dalit movement, say for instance, even if you look at the caste system in India, the so-called untouchables were peoples, that came out, the global African family, the global black family. And so we're charging the United Kingdom government with genocide because in law, even within conventional international law, what is happening to us as black people, in particular here in Britain, is genocide. And nobody else is going to argue this for us, people. This is a demand, this is an argument that only we can make, only we can articulate. And we no longer need the wider society's permission to speak and to speak our truth to power. And so really it's about speaking our truth to power. And we're speaking a truth on the basis of we want a world of global justice. But until black people have justice on this planet, and in particular here in Britain, then no other people will receive justice. And this is at the root of much of the social decay, even within our own communities, warfare, community dispossession. Much of the social problems and social crises that you see today are as a result of historical injustice. So we will be filing a petition at the United Nations on the 10th of December 2003, which is International Human Rights Day. And really this petition is to bring the international community, the world community, bring the attention of the British government and the human rights abuses that the British government is perpetrating against its own citizenry right here in the United Kingdom. Because interestingly enough, the British government, Bush, Blair, etc., go around the world being the world's policemen. But they do not like it when you actually expose their very systems to the same scrutiny which they go around the world trying to dictate to others how they should live, talking about human rights abuses committed in other parts of the world. Africa is a common topic of interest for the British people, talking about human rights, when they do not even respect the human rights of black people here. So this is our argument. We want to bring the world, we want to draw attention to our plight here. And in doing that, we want to bring about principled unity amongst black peoples all over the world, and also principled unity in terms of solidarity movements. We're only going to move forward on the basis of principle. The We Charge Genocide petition and campaign is really part of our public mobilization strategy, because we have to get ordinary people to understand their situation and to understand that it's not happening to us because, we haven't done well enough, or because we are not successful, or because we have family disintegration, or because of whatever, the blame the victim approach. It's really because of systemic processes which were put into place before many of us were born, have been there for centuries, and we're really seeking to shine the light of truth on this. And we really have to understand our situation, because unless we understand our situation, we will not move forward in the way that we need to do. And really it's about getting all the campaigns, because every day I open up the newspapers, I listen to our the community radio stations, everywhere around in the United Kingdom, black people are suffering. We're catching hell in this place. But yet what hasn't happened, or what has not been happening, is our recognition that this is affecting us as a group. And the We Charge Genocide petition and campaign is really about how do we take these issues to the people? How can we get them to identify their situation and come on board and support the movement. So for instance, we have groups who have experienced cases of injustice in their families, similar to the current Black Deaths in Custody campaign. There are many more families who are not officially part of that campaign, who've lost family members, who are suffering hell every day, but who have been terrorized out of getting into any kind of political activity around their case. So what we are saying is that we want you to, support this campaign so that when we take this petition, we can actually highlight instances, genuine instances of injustice and human rights abuses, individuals and family members, family campaigns. But our banner is genocide, because genocide is about an intent to destroy a group in whole or in part, or bringing about conditions which are designed to prevent the longevity of that group. And I would argue, and many more of us in the community would argue, that the social conditions that we are living under are designed to destroy our communities. Nobody just taking a cursory look around many of our communities which are not there, we don't have a sense of community as Black people of African descent, but yet we see other so-called Black communities, i.e. let's just say the Asian community for instance, who seem to be advancing significantly. They have, let's just take the GLA for instance, there is a policy advisor on Asian affairs. Where is our policy advisor on African affairs? As Black people, we can no longer sit by and be spectators in our own lives and our own liberation. Really, the challenge is for all of us, wherever we are, whether we're professional or not, whether we're teachers, educators, mothers, fathers, whoever we are, whether we have no vocational profession, to really stand up and start articulating our demands now. And if we don't organise and make demands as a community, nobody else is going to do this for us. So it's not about us blaming other communities, because they're actually advancing their own group interests, and they're doing what any human being does around supporting their own self-interest. What we as Black people of African descent have to do is the same thing, and that's why the Black United Front is so important, because we see ourselves as being an independent, self-representative, self-determining, self-governing, self-empowering formulation, coalition of Black organisations here in Britain, really seeking to organise ourselves and define for ourselves the policies that affect our communities, and to advocate on and with our communities, on their behalf and with our communities, and to encourage, more importantly, our communities to be involved. So it's not about us sitting back. We want to be a truly representative voice for Black people, because we are saying we do not have that in Britain. We do not have it within mainstream politics, we do not have it in the Labour Party, we do not have it in the Conservative or Liberal Democrats or the Green Party or any other party. And despite the efforts of an Operation Black Vote, we are not seeing truly the effective voices of the Black community being voiced. And this is what we see ourselves as a Black United Front being able to do, and a parliament with that. In the same way, in this country you have a Jewish Board of Deputies and you have the Muslim Council of Britain. There is no issue about Jewish affairs that the Jewish Board of Deputies in Britain is not consulted on. But yet, when anything to do with Black people, whether it's here in Britain or whether it's in Africa or the Caribbean or wherever else we as Black people reside, there is no body that is consulted regularly, that is even paid any even type of cursory respect by this government and the powers that be. Instead, our leaders are handpicked and chosen for us, and are actually also removed as well at will when they do not serve the oppressor's agenda. And so really we are independent, we are not selected or elected by any of our oppressors. We in the community choose our own leaders, and really that is what is absent in Black British politics, the absence of truly representative leadership for Black people. So a lot of the time we are forced to not speak our truth to power, and that is what we are seeking to do. We do not want to just keep our politics within ghettos, because we have been ghettoized in this country. It's not about ghetto politics, it's actually about being big political players, not only here on the national scene but on the international scene, because as black people we have family all over the world, and so really we seek to also be a representative voice of black communities worldwide, whether it's the Aboriginals in Australia, whether it's the indigenous peoples of the Americas, whether it's black peoples in Asia. We also seek to be a voice here because the role of Britain being an imperial power, the British Empire, which is still very much in operation and is actually gaining and gathering strength and momentum, seeking to recolonize large aspects of the globe again, including Africa and the Caribbean, where many of our direct descendants come from.
Today's guest is Esther Stanford, the European representative for the Global African Congress and a legal advisor to the Black Quest for Justice campaign, initiating legal action for reparations from the British Crown, government and its agencies for the enslavement of African people 400 to 500 years ago. They intend to seek redress for the damage that the long-standing crime of slavery and its contemporary legacies, for example, miseducation, crime, proven statistics of overrepresentation within prisons and psychiatric institutions, poverty levels, a claim that some say is long overdue. Welcome. We're speaking with Esther Stanford, Europe rep for the Global African Congress and legal advisor to the Black Quest for Justice's campaign of legal action for reparations. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Esther, reparations, it is such, just the thought of reparations alone for African Caribbean people, African American people, African English people. Tell me what exactly is happening insofar as this claim goes.
Okay, well, when we talk about the reparations movement, first we need to be mindful that this is an emerging, vociferous international movement. And the reparations movement is really nothing new. It's a very old movement. From the time that we were taken and kidnapped from the shores of Africa, our people have been calling for reparations. Whether they've utilized or used the word reparations or not, we've been seeking justice, we've been seeking repair, we've been seeking reconstruction, we've been seeking, redress for the injustices that we have faced. In this century, we have witnessed a growth in the reparations movement, and the movement was propelled forward significantly by the 2001 UN World Conference Against Racism, which took place in Durban, South Africa. As a result of the Durban conference, you had independent African activists, and when I say African, I mean peoples of the continent of Africa and the diaspora, who mobilized and organized and agitated for key programs and declarations to be included in the Intergovernmental Programme of Action. And you had paragraph 13 of the Durban Programme of Action, the Intergovernmental Programme of Action, where it was acknowledged that enslavement, the transatlantic slave trade, what is called the transatlantic slave trade, slavery and colonialism were crimes against humanity. So this was a significant advance forward, because once you have that declaration that enslavement was a crime against humanity, then international law, as it currently stands, says that those that commit crimes against humanity must make reparations.
So insofar as reparations go, who is being targeted? I know that there is a document being presented to the British monarchy on May the 6th. Can you tell us a bit about that document?
Yes, there is a legal action which will be initiated on the 6th of May. And this will be a document which will be presented to the Office of the Attorney General. Because for us in the movement, we believe that reparations is not for crimes that were committed in the past. And so in the UK, the Black Quest for Justice campaign have adopted a global strategy which makes it unique among all of the reparations movements in the world. And bearing in mind there's a Zimbabwean reparations movement, there's a South African reparations movement, there's movements in the Caribbean. There was a recent letter that was issued to the Queen by some Rastafarian brethren in Jamaica asking for assistance in terms of repatriation to Africa and reparations. You know, there's the African American lawsuits, there's a group of lawsuits that have been issued against insurance companies, for instance. So the movement is a very international movement. And in the UK, the Black Quest for Justice have adopted a global strategy, really taking the best from all of those movements, putting them together into one strategy, because we believe that part of the damage in terms of enslavement and our current dislocation as a peoples was a removal of us from our homeland, a disjointing, a breaking up of the African family, so that we are now called all these different terms: African Caribbean, African American, Jamaican, Barbadian. And so as a people, we are so fragmented. And part of what we are seeking to do is put things back on target, where we are saying we are one people and we were targeted as one people. So it does not matter whether we consider ourselves to be Britons, whether we consider ourselves to be African Americans, Jamaicans, Barbadians, Trinidadians. We are saying that there is one claim, one cause, and that it was one system, one people, the Caucasian people, peoples of Europe, who are now spread throughout the globe. We're talking about, you know, Australia, Canada, America. They came from Europe, basically. So we're talking about this global trade in African flesh that was instigated by the Europeans.
Back to basics. Tell me, what exactly are the reparations going to take the form of? Because largely when you think of reparations, you think, okay, we're going to get money for slavery, money for things that have happened to us in the past. Is that how this body views the reparations? Okay,
first I need to start with, how do we understand reparations? Because one of the things that come up when we discuss reparations is, how much money are we going to get? Exactly. Who's going to get the money? Precisely. Who's going to be entitled to the money? What we must understand is that the damage that we are seeking to rectify, as I said, is still continuing. So first of all, we need to put a stop to the damage. So for instance, in the UK, we look at the miseducation system. Right now, there is a crisis in the education of the black child and also black adults. You need to just go to a prison and see them full up of black people. I believe the recent statistics from the Home Office say 1 in 100 black men are incarcerated in the penal institutions. If you go into the psychiatric institutions, you'll find very similar tragic figures. Every aspect of our lives, from the womb to the tomb, we are saying that these are the vestiges of enslavement. We also have to target, we have to repair the damage that's been done to our black psyche, our African psyche. You know, you see many of our women bleaching their skins. This is part of the trauma in terms of enslavement, where we were made to feel inferior. And so we are suffering from what's called post-traumatic slave disorder. And so much of even the raising of the black child, you know, in families where we talk about good hair and bad hair,
yes,
light skin and dark
skin,
light skin and dark skin. This is part of the damage that we are seeking to rectify. So when we define reparations, first and foremost, those of us in the movement must retain the right to define what the injury has been for us. Our claim is not like that of the Jewish people. Our claim is not like that of the Aboriginal people or the Maori people. Our claim is not like that of the Japanese Americans. So we are saying that the damage is a damage that has been happening for centuries, 5 centuries, the European assault on Africa and the peoples of Africa, global Africa as we call it. And this damage is multifaceted. And in fact, we take the definition of reparations that was advanced by Professor Chinwezu. at the 1993 Abuja conference, which was the first Pan-African reparations conference. And he said that reparations was not just about money. In fact, reparations is not even 1% about money. Reparations is about making repairs. It's about making every type of repairs that are needed to recreate and sustain viable black societies. We're talking about repairs of every type: educational, organizational, spiritual, cultural, economic, philosophical, community, family, and so forth. He says that more important than any lands to be recovered, more important than any monies to be received, is the opportunity that the reparations campaign offers for the rehabilitation of black people, for black people, and by black people. So this is the definition that we advance for reparations, because we are talking about holistic repairs. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that money's not involved, because, for instance, we can actually put a claim in terms of the 400, 500 years of labour.
Right.
Let's just work that out today. When so-called British slavery was abolished in the colonies, the West Indian planters received £20 million in compensation, and the Africans that had toiled from sun up to sundown received nothing. If we just translate that today in terms of what that would be in monetary,
Yes.
recompense, if you like, and then we have to look at the interest. So it's a whole lot of money.
Right.
A whole lot of money that we're talking about if we're only going to deal with money alone. But we're also talking about monies in terms of financing our own self-repair, community repair programs and plans. And this is multifaceted. The reparations, claim is about debt repudiation. We don't say debt cancellation because we do not accept there's any debt. After colonization, we were not paid. And so we are saying that the whole World Bank, IMF, is a fraud, and we repudiate the debt. We do not accept that it exists, and we would want this to be part of our reparations claim. So this is for the countries of Africa and the Caribbean, and wherever black people, exactly, wherever black, which is crippling them, which is crippling the countries, and this is why we see, underdevelopment in our countries of origin. We're talking about corrections in terms of culturally appropriate educational institutions, because the legal approach of the Black Quest for Justice campaign starts with a class action on education. And we start with education because part of the damage, and in fact the biggest damage that has been done to us as a people, is our failure to recognize that we are a people who have been injured. We think today because we have a nice job, that we drive a nice car, that we're free. We're not free, because as a people we do not have self-determination. Everything in terms of our so-called advancement is advancement along a particular path of development, which is Eurocentric. And so what we are saying is that we need to repair the damage. And part of the damage has been the menticide, the collective destruction of the black or African psyche and mentality. And so in the schools, this is where the damage is done, where we are not taught about our true history. And our history is relegated to, being some Africans who were civilized by the Europeans. And so this damage it does to the psyche of the black child, which then goes on to, people being excluded, children being excluded, perhaps getting into crime and so forth, because we do not know who we are.
Esther, I understand what you're saying, but in a real sense, how does Quest for Justice expect this to work? Because you're filing this kind of class action in a predominantly Caucasian society. You are asking the people that you're accusing of having done wrong to you to come at this late stage and say, well, we did you wrong and we're going to give you money and we're going to fix all of your problems. Do you realistically expect this to work? Do you think that this is the way to go about getting this fixed? Or is it something that we should not do as black people, as people of the diaspora, try and look internally instead of going outside yet again to have someone else fix our problems?
Yes, I think both. Thank you for the question. In fact, you're right in terms of what you said. What we are saying is we're not expecting Caucasians, Europeans, white people to fix us. But what we are saying is that we are entitled, as a matter of our human and people's rights, to recompense for the damage that continues to be perpetrated against against our communities. So for instance, today we have this issue of so-called black-on-black violence, gun crime.
Yes.
Obviously, this is part of the post-traumatic slave disorder, where as an oppressed people, because we are so miseducated, we then turn our oppression internally as opposed to turning it against the people who are the cause of our oppression. And so this is how we explain the so-called black-on-black violence, yes? And so what we are saying is that we want the resources, which can be calculated in monetary amounts, in terms of repairing the damage that has been done to ourselves. We're also talking about not only free education, we're talking about health care, we're also talking about social security, we're talking about amnesty for unregistered migrants in Europe, we're talking about the release of all political prisoners and prisoners of conscience, and it's arguable that many black people who are incarcerated in the penal system are political prisoners because we are not tried in the same way as our Caucasian counterparts. We are talking about a global truth commission. We want the truth about our history. So there is a whole range of remedies that we are seeking. But first and foremost, we are asking for the right to our self-determination, the right to define ourselves how we choose. Now, people might think that this is pie in the sky, but for instance, in Britain, why is it we cannot have black schools unless they're faith schools? So what we are saying is that we are stopped from developing according to our own best interests. And even those of us that are supposedly the most successful, for instance, the Paul Bottings of this world, we would argue are the most miseducated of this world. And in fact, we would want to subpoena people like Paul Boateng to actually, come before an international tribunal, and we would just question them, and we would just ask basic questions, and we would be able to prove how miseducated and the menticide that is still going on and being committed against black peoples. In fact, we are charging genocide against the United Kingdom government, and if you look at the definition of genocide as was advanced at the 1948 Genocide Convention, we're talking about killing members of a group, we're talking about the intention to destroy a group in whole or in part, whether it's a racial, national, ethnic or religious group, and also creating circumstances which are designed to prevent births within the group. So for instance, many of the deficits, the health deficits that we experience, the psychological deficits we experience, we are a people who are traumatized. And nowhere has this trauma been acknowledged. For instance, in this country we have a big issue with paedophilia. And I know there was a recent case of 2 little girls who were, abducted and so forth, and the whole village had to receive counselling. What about us as a people? We are still being traumatized, but yet we are not having any recognition of the crimes against humanity. And bearing in mind, this is not coming out of my mouth. This was something that came out of the Durban Conference, the United Nations Conference, the World Conference Against Racism that took place in 2001. 168 governments of the world acknowledged that slavery was a crime against humanity. So what we are saying is that we want justice. We're not asking for anything that we are not entitled to. We want justice as other peoples who have experienced and suffered and continue to suffer crimes against humanity.
Esther, tell me about the class action that's happening on May the 6th.
Yes, the class action will be initiating a legal action which will be making a request of the Attorney General, Lord Goldsmith QC, to investigate and try those responsible for crimes against humanities, against the peoples of Africa and African descent, here primarily in the United Kingdom. And the reason why we are adopting this strategy is because we are charging the United Kingdom government and in fact the Crown of the United Kingdom with crimes against humanity, war crimes and genocide. We can prove this in law, and what we are saying is that we want to have access to legal redress. As I've said, in international law, even the European conceptualization of international law, because we take issue with international law because we believe that so-called international law must be the law that's made up of the nations of the world. And in fact, what you have is European domination. And so for us, we're talking about true international law must be the laws of the indigenous peoples of the world, the Aboriginals, the Maoris, and so forth. So even looking at international law within a European or Eurocentric context, those that commit crimes against humanity must make reparations. However, in the United Kingdom, the only official that can bring crimes against humanity proceedings is the Attorney General. So we are initiating this action by requesting of the Attorney General that he use his powers of investigation under the International Criminal Courts Act of 2001 to investigate our claim. And in fact, we are calling for a commission, a public inquiry into the case for African reparations. So what we are saying is that give us the opportunity to prove our case, because at the moment we are stopped. The laws are framed in such a way that the very people who are responsible in terms of their office, I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking about offices, are people who escape justice. And so we are, initiating these proceedings. First and foremost, we do not believe that necessarily that there is any court on planet Earth as currently stands that can adjudicate the reparations claim. We are pushing for the setting up of what we call the International People's Assembly on reparations. And so, but there are steps in order to get to that point. First of all, we have to prove and utilize the current systems that we have in place. We now have an international criminal court, which is really no international criminal court because the United States has absented itself from it and has said that no American citizens will be tried before this court. And as a result of that, Russia and China are also threatening to pull out. So how can we say we have an international court and adjudicate our claim when some of the biggest players are not going to sit at the table and be held accountable?
Okay, Esther, fast forward 10 to 15 years. Your reparation investigation has been done, your claim has been made, and it's been decided that you indeed will be given reparation for crimes against humanity, genocide, etc., etc. How will this be given out to people? How will it be dispatched? Because I think that this is one of the big concerns that most people have about any reparations claim. How are all of the people in the diaspora being as diverse as they are in several ways? First of all, insofar as them living in so many different countries, there are people from the diaspora living everywhere apart from Africa in the world. How are all of those people going to be compensated? And I also ask you from a point of view of ethnic composition. There are many people who are considered to be black that are genuinely half white, a quarter Chinese, and then 1/4 African, and those people are considered black. How is it going to work? How are those people going to be given reparation if it in fact comes down to a situation where, let's say, £1 million for each black person who still survives as a result of slavery, who can trace their ancestry back to West Africa, etc., etc. How would people like that be able to get reparation? How would that work?
Okay. First of all, what we are not seeking to do in the reparations campaign is the divide and rule. So the question you asked about ethnic composition, I believe that on the plantation, it didn't matter whether somebody had quarter Chinese or Portuguese or what have you, on the basis of one's African ancestry, whether it was mother, father, grandfather or so forth, we were all on the plantation together. And I do believe that it was the Caucasian, the European, that introduced these class and race stratification systems. Exactly.
I can't remember what they
exactly.
were.
I mean, there was many, I believe, up to 16.
You had your house slave and you had.
But this was part of the divide and rule, and this is part of what we are seeking to repair. So really, the post-reparations global order will be a world totally different to the world that we currently experience. And for some of us, this is very, very difficult to grasp. But I always use the example of when our ancestors were on the plantation, many people would have said we will never ever be free from physical bondage, but yet today we are. And so we have to have the vision, and it will be up to us as a community, as a global African community, African descendant community, to decide how any reparations claims are actually meted out. And one of the issues that I think many of us take issue with in the movement is this, this worry about how will this money, if we get money, how will it be meted out, will it be fair and so forth. This wasn't asked of Jewish people. people. This wasn't asked of any other people. It's a matter of give us what we are due. It's up to us. Unless we are saying that we are incapable of running our own affairs, running our own countries, running our own governments and so forth, which is not what we are saying, then we are saying that obviously we haven't got all of the answers yet. In particular, we need to be surveying our communities. We need to be finding out from our, our professionals, our experts and the grassroots communities what is needed. And then we need to collectively have structures that we can implement this. I mean, we talk about development structures. We've spoken about like a Marshall Plan for peoples of African descent. They've spoken about an economic bank and so forth. So there are a whole range of measures that are on the tables. But what we are saying is that it has to be an issue that is decided collectively by our community. And so at present, part of the damage that has been done is that we have been removed, if you like, from our own sovereignty and our ability to determine our own destinies. So, for instance, Jewish people have a Jewish Board of Deputies. Asian communities and the Chinese communities also have their structures of governments. In the United Kingdom, we do not have any black independent structures. And this is what we are seeking to create. And so the whole process will involve mass mobilization, mass education, and so forth. And this work has already, started in terms of what would be the main demands of our communities, even in terms of individual reparations, group reparations, and so forth. We're talking about development programs, we're talking about our own schools, we're talking about our own institutions of healing, because we know there are so many of us damaged. You just need to look in any psychiatric institution to see how many damaged black people there are, and it's not because there's something genetically wrong with us or because we're genetically inferior. These are the traumas, and these are casualties. In fact, we argue that we are casualties of war, and we argue that there has been an undeclared war against peoples of Africa and African descent for the last 5 centuries, and we want this war to stop, we want the crimes to stop, and so forth.
Following May the 6th, what's next? After the Attorney General decides whatever he decides, what do you guys do after that?
Okay, after May the 6th, we will be calling, as I said, for a public inquiry, because we're not even saying that we deserve anything. What we are saying is give us the opportunity to establish our case, which we have not had up until now, and we've been prevented from doing so. We'll be embarking on mass mobilization and educational campaign. And this is the whole approach of the legal strategy, because we believe that the lawsuit, the legal action, serves to educate citizens, not only black people, but white peoples, about the travesties of justice that are committed here in Britain. And many of us who consider ourselves to be citizens of the United Kingdom, but yet you can have the Crown, Queen Elizabeth II, in her response to the Jamaicans, saying that, well, enslavement wasn't a crime at the time, and so forth. We don't just want memorials. That's not going to repair the damage. We want a whole lot more than that. And so we need to be engaging all of civil society, from our government, all our professionals, the community, teachers, and so forth. We need everybody on board, because everybody has something to contribute and will have a perspective on what reparations is and what is needed. In particular, we just need to look at the damage and the destruction that we see in our inner city communities, where we, as I said, we have black on black self-annihilation in service of white domination. These are all parts of the vestiges of enslavement and parts of the damage that we are seeking redress for. But the first thing is that we need to have recognition that as a people we have been harmed historically and contemporarily. And that was what Durban did. Durban issued that statement. The 168 governments around the world, including the United Kingdom, acknowledging that enslavement was a crime against humanity. From Durban, we had the African and African Descendants World Conference Against Racism in Barbados, October 2002, where we formulated the International Front for African Reparations, and the Global African Congress was born. And the Global African Congress, being a global organization to advocate for the rights and seek justice for global Africa, has set up this international campaign where 6 countries in particular will be targeted. These are the United Kingdom, the United States of America, France, Belgium, Germany, and the Netherlands.
Okay, Esther, thank you very much for that very informative discussion.
We want to thank Esther for talking with us today.
The Black Quest for Justice campaign will be initiating its legal action against the Crown and the Government of the United Kingdom, its agents and its corporations on Tuesday the 6th of May. Why Tuesday the 6th of May? Because really this is the 10th anniversary in terms of the 5th of May of the early day motion that the late Bernie Grant MP put before the House of Commons in support of reparations. Since this motion was put in 1993, nothing has been done. And so we are seeking to put pressure and keep the fire burning in terms of the African reparations claim. And so we believe that the time is now come for the reparations claim to be taken seriously. We issued a letter before action on the Queen's Jubilee, which was the 2nd of June, basically asking for a response, asking for action again on the early day motion, and we received no response. So we've had to go ahead with our planned legal proceedings. We are issuing and making a request of the Attorney General to initiate, under his powers of the Criminal Courts Act of 2001, to investigate the case for crimes against humanity committed against African peoples. After we have asked for this, we're calling for a commission of public inquiry into our case, where we want to be given the opportunity to prove our case, to establish that there is a prima facie case for African reparations. And after we have done this, we are going to be mobilizing across the black and white communities in support of this public inquiry, mobilizing our young people, our students, mobilizing our trade unionists, because reparations is fundamentally a labor issue in terms of the deprived labor, the deprived inheritance that we African descendants have been deprived of in terms of our birthright and so forth. And we will be engaging the wider community in dialogue around the issue of reparations, because we believe that the reparations case is a case which is about our collective redemption as humanity. And we believe that until we as African people have achieved justice for the historical and contemporary crimes against humanity which we continue to face, then the whole world will continue to experience destabilization and wars upon wars. And so we are building our reparations case within the wider anti-war and wider anti-globalization movement, because we believe that it is the resources of Africa, global Africa, human and material, that are currently being used to wage many, many wars throughout planet Earth. So we are seeking true freedom, true justice for all of humanity. And we believe that for people in the United Kingdom, there is a lot that they do not know about how Europe is what it is, why Africa and the rest of the black world is what it is. And so unless Africa and the Caribbean receive reparations, and this is global Africa, then we believe that we will continue to experience what is called the global immigration crisis. And so for us, we believe that it is within the interests of the wider British public to understand why you have refugees and asylum seekers that come to these shores, and so that they understand historically the crimes that their leaders have committed and the crimes that their leaders continue to commit by putting us against each other. And so really we are seeking unity and justice. We will be mobilizing our communities and those of us who want to support the reparations campaign to help us with our petition, which we will be filing to the United Nations on the 10th of December 2003. and this will also be filed at the International Criminal Court, because the strategy of the Black Quest for Justice campaign is also to try and seek legal reparations, because we're saying that the instruments, the very instruments of justice are unjust. The very laws that are supposed to protect us are unjust. So when we talk about reparations, we also need to have legal reparations. We want all of the colonial and neocolonial laws to be repealed, and in fact we would want to see enacted into domestic legislation a true understanding of racism, because one of the legacies that we face that was defined at Durban was anti-black racism, and we refined this term in Barbados to Afrophobia, which is the racism that peoples of African descent face, being very different to the racism that all other groups face. So we are really pushing for this recognition within domestic legislation, and we will be putting pressure by lobbying and mobilising and engaging in public debate, putting pressure on the British government to implement the Durban and Bridgetown programmes of action in furtherance of global justice.